What are some of the enterprise versions of Agentic AI, if you have seen any, and is that a hype or are we?
No, you see a lot of, so it's very much in the prototyping stage for many organizations. It's across a full spectrum activities. So there's the classic customer support examples where there's an agent that interfaces with a customer that directs activity on a back end.
Yeah.
There's activities where you may have a personal agent on your behalf that does travel booking, make appointments, schedules part of your life. There's agents that you can dispatch to go research information for you and then help come back with recommendations for certain things. It could be, again, part of running your aspects of your life. It could be aspects of running your business. There's agents that are providing more like professional services activity to analyze contracts, to analyze information. So it's anything that can be autonomous and goal-directed and tool-using is what you might think of as an agent.
Welcome to AI Cybersecurity Podcast. We've got Phil Venables here at RSA. Phil, welcome to the show. To start off with, could you just share a bit about yourself, where you are today? How did you get stuck in cybersecurity?
Yeah, like I've been in cybersecurity for the longest time, probably well over 30 years. I've been at Google as Google Cloud's Chief Information Security Officer for about 4.5 years. Just transitioned into more of a strategic advisor role for the company, as well as some other things outside of Google. Really great to be here this week.
Awesome. You've had quite a bit of different experience in different industries as well. Financial sector, tech now.
We want your origin story.
If you're going to go back to the origin story, so I started off as a software engineer, building in a variety of industries, so coal mining, oil, defense. I was one of the original kind of developing industrial control systems years ago. And I first got into security by building cryptographic software for banks, high-value payment systems, and then showing my age a little bit, in 1995, I built one of the world's first internet-facing banks. And
internet banking.
So this was for a British bank called Standard Chartered.
Oh yeah, still there.
Working with some of your audience may remember these things: Netscape, Sun, checkpoint firewalls, the whole stuff. Like back in the middle of the 90s when we were first bringing banks online. And then after that, I spent working up until Google, working in financial services. Spent the longest part of my career as the first Chief Information Security Officer for Goldman Sachs, and then came to Google.
Yeah, that's why I first met you as well. And now we're in this AI world. This is the AI Cybersecurity Podcast. Just to level the playing field first for, how do you describe AI security to people today? I think a lot of conversations I had on the floor, at least for the past couple of days, has been more around, people are still trying to figure out what is Agentic AI, which is funny because we've been talking about Agentic AI for a long time on the podcast, but seems like people are still confused about what that is. So in the conversations you've been having about AI, I guess, what's the landscape looking like for you and how do you describe that to other people today?
Yeah, I think it's important to remember before talking about kind of new forms of AI, just to keep remembering that we're still getting massive amount of value out of existing deep learning, machine learning technologies, the more what we would call predictive AI. So that's still an immense amount of what's going on in the environment. Moving on to generative AI, though, we're seeing a lot of applications clearly across all different types of business, but also inside security, whether it's automating activities, vulnerability discovery, automating the generation of secure configurations, a whole array of activities. So there's been a lot of value seen in there. And then also now with Agentic AI, it's taking it to the next level of being able to automate tool use and have agents orchestrate security activities to deliver those outcomes. So it's across the full spectrum of activities. But also we've obviously got to remember that most security teams, as well as using AI for their own purposes, are busily supporting their businesses and their organizations in the wider, safe, secure, and compliant adoption of AI for their own business purposes as well.
Yeah. So we've seen, when you look around at the enterprises, everyone obviously is talking about AI, but there's been this struggle that we've seen where every security company is touting all these security capabilities. This is where we're going to do security. But when you actually talk to the business, they're still even today trying to figure out how they even use AI in the business and make it even into production. I heard a stat that was quoted to me just recently that less than 5% are really using AI in production environments. What's your view on it? Do you feel that's happening? Do you think that this is a hype train that will come crashing down, or hey, there's a lot of length and capability, we're just not there yet?
No, I think the exact opposite. But again, I've got like an observation bias that we're a very large cloud provider and a very large AI company. And so the use cases we're working on, it's literally thousands of companies are running on our platform with AI tooling delivering a whole array of different business value, whether it's customer support automation, even things like using AI for new pharmaceutical discovery, materials discovery. It's all sorts of things to do with language translation, data analytics. It's a whole array of things. So we saw last year a lot of prototypes and pilots, and organizations really experimenting broadly. And that has narrowed in to what they're focusing on, their actual deployments where they're getting significant value. So I think a lot of that is because the experimentation phase is drawing to an end and the actual production application is really hitting hard now. So last year there was a lot of prototyping. This year there's a lot of implementation and real value being achieved across all different types of businesses. So I'm very much seeing huge amounts of value being unleashed by the use of AI.
As CISO now in Google, what are the top things when you're looking at now these things are shifting into production? What are like the top 3 things you're like, okay, this worries me. How are we going to get a grip on this and how do we manage it?
So coincidentally, the 3 big things we focus on is really 3 pillars of control. So we spend a lot of time working with organizations about how do they shift from that prototype to production phase and really helping them think through the controls. So there's really 3 pillars. One, this is a software lifecycle risk, and some of the work you've been doing has echoed that around how do you maintain and manage the end-to-end software environment that delivers AI, whether it's in the training, the serving, the inference, the fine-tuning. So that's one pillar. The second pillar is it's a data governance pillar. So you've got to manage the lineage of the training data, the fine-tuning, the test data, that whole data governance approach is critical. And then the third and final piece is the operational risk management of deployments, deploying AI with appropriate guardrails, appropriate checks, input-output filters. Yeah. And so organizations that are doing well on getting their AI deployed safely and in control really focus on those 3 pillars: software, data governance, and the operational risk management of the deployment.
Like, I know that you operate at a large scale, but if you can, like, what advice would you give to people who have teams of small resources? If they can do all 3 of those, where do you think the biggest challenges and biggest risks are in those 3 phases?
So I think the big opportunity for all of them, and this is a slight sales pitch, I have to do it, is you got to buy a platform. So one of the things, again, there are other great tech companies out there, but what we've done at Google in building our Vertex AI platform is this has got all of those controls built into the platform itself. So if you're a small company or even a large company, you just want to get value out of the technology, you want to bring your data to the controlled platform, you want to have the flexibility to use many different models, not just the models that we might provide, and have that as one integrated platform. You inherit those controls as part of the use of a platform. And I think that's one of the most important things. Yeah, there are lots of small companies out there that give you a very particular bit of technology, but they may not give you the testing, the operational controls, the data governance controls. That's why it's important to have an end-to-end platform for utilizing and managing your AI technology.
Okay, so we know, go to Google, use Vertex, but even then, as a, say, CISO, where do you think, what areas of those are, you should focus here in the start of your program?
So again, there's 2 sides of it. One is making sure as the CISO team, essentially CISOs are becoming more like chief digital risk officers for their businesses. So they're helping businesses think about not just the security of AI, but the controls, the data lifecycle, the compliance, the privacy, the safety deployment, all of that kind of stuff. So the CISOs are very focused on that for their organizations. Then the second piece is CISOs as a business unit in itself, adopting AI to transform the security program, whether it's vulnerability discovery, security operations automation, it's a whole array of things. So we see CISO teams doing those things, concentrating on supporting their organization's safe adoption of AI and using it themselves to transform their own operations. And I think those are a dual track approach.
I was going to say, out of curiosity, with the Google Next event, talking about CISOs as well, you guys held an event especially for CISOs. I'm curious as to hear what were some of the top of mind things that people were asking for in terms of, we're obviously talking about the 3 pillars you mentioned for software as we were adopted on both sides, whether we're doing security for AI security. In the current 2025 RSA or before this at Google Cloud Next, the conversations you had with the CISOs that were in that room, I'm curious what was top of mind for them in terms of what they see as risk. And you don't have to be specific in terms of company names, but more in the context of the general team you found that was top of mind for, hey, this is what I see as a risk. So I'm curious about...
I'll give examples. Like, I hear it all the time that people are like, oh, data leakage and my private data going are huge concerns. People saying, oh, prompt injection is my biggest concern. Or people, agents, they're going to control agents. And or deepfakes are
email being amazing as well, like phishing emails being more specific. I'm curious
So
to
there's
hear.
a few things. So one, though, very curious on our position around adversarial use of AI. Well, for example, so our Google Threat Intelligence team has published some great work on
Mandiant.
really, the Google tag Mandiant combination we call Google Threat Intelligence. So they've done some great work analyzing what actually attackers are using AI for. And it's actually interesting because they're not using it for that many sophisticated use cases yet. We see and have profiled both Russia, China, North Korea, Iran, organized criminal groups. They're using it to generate better phishing emails, which is not surprising, but the mitigation for that is phishing resistant, strong cryptographic authentication. Not anything, AI doesn't need to mitigate that.
No.
They're using it for fraudulent activity, constructing fake voice, video, image to dupe and defraud people.
Okay.
So again, that's why it's important to have a broader set of controls against that. But we're not really seeing attackers using it yet, but they probably will for kind of advanced vulnerability discovery. Now, I'm both happy and sad about that because that means that attackers are not having to go to that advanced level yet, which means they're still finding pay dirt in existing attacks.
They're figuring it out.
I think they'll go. But generally speaking, what the adversary is using AI for is what a lot of people are using AI for, which is to automate their activities, improve their workflow, enhance their productivity. So there was a lot of curiosity about that. Again, to your point, many organizations are figuring out how do they improve their identity verification in the face of deepfakes. There's a number of companies out there, Get Real Labs and others that can help with that. There's plenty of other threats to their identity and business processes that they're interested in mitigating. So that was one set of topics. The second thing is a big focus of a lot of the security teams is how do they deal with their workforce skills challenges. So how do they use AI to amplify productivity, to democratize talent, to increase the expertise level of teams by augmenting people with AI. So a lot of focus there.
AI for security.
AI for security.
Exactly. And then the final thing is just how do they organize to support their businesses in their safe adoption of AI and being very focused on things like you mentioned, which is not using AI in a way that would leak their data to other customers of that same AI platform. And again, one of the reasons we spend a lot of time at Google putting in kind of isolation layers between our customer environments is to make sure that the customers can use the models, fine-tune it with their proprietary data in highly controlled ways without there being any risk of that data leaking through the platform to other environments. So we've invested a huge amount, again, in that platform of doing that customer data isolation. And that was a big thing that a lot of the CISOs want to learn more about and expect more from the AI and the cloud providers to do that. Right. And so we spend a lot of time delivering on that.
A couple of years ago, everyone started the AI security conversation with Terminator situation arrived. Right. The threat to humanity. Today, almost 2 years of people using all kinds of LLMs, building their own ones, there seems to be a lot more maturity and what I'm hearing from you as well, conversations about deepfake, better phishing emails, identity and how people can use it to enhance their productivity. There seems to be a lot more maturity in how people have an understanding of this.
Well, I think people have become more familiar with the technology. They're more familiar with building the guardrails in their business to regulate for themselves how AI is being used to do things. So for example, financial institutions building AI that can interface with customers and then make changes to back-end systems. They've built in guardrails and circuit breakers and checks to make sure that even if that particular use of AI goes off the beaten path, that there's a surrounding check to make sure that's controlled. So everybody's over the past 18 months, more organizations have learned how to build those guardrails in. And so they get more comfortable with the places they can deploy these things. Now, of course, a lot of interest as we get into kind of agentic AI, where we're going to have more agents acting autonomously to achieve goals. That's where we're spending a lot of time and with organizations figuring out how to put the checks and the controls into agents so that agents operate within certain parameters to achieve an outcome.
This is now threat to workforce.
Threat to workforce.
Yeah.
I'm glad you mentioned agentic AI as the autonomous thing. I've had so many conversations over the past couple of days where every time I talk about agentic AI and I try to ask, so what is it doing? It always boils down to it's a chatbot. And I think
I had a debate about this just last night. It's exactly, no, agentic is defined like this. And I'm like, agentic should be defined that way.
The reason I bring that up is, out of curiosity, there are only a handful of examples in the true agentic AI that at least all of us seem to believe Have you seen examples in organizations where, and you don't have to be calling out client names or whatever, but I'm curious as to what are some of the enterprise versions of Agentic AI, if you have seen any, and if is that a hype or are we?
No, you see a lot of, so it's very much in the prototyping stage for many organizations.
Right.
It's across a full spectrum activities. So there's the classic customer support examples where there's an agent that interfaces with a customer that directs activity on a back end.
Yep.
There's activities where you may have a personal agent on your behalf that does travel booking, make appointments, schedules part of your life. There's agents that you can dispatch to go research information for you and then help come back with recommendations for certain things. It could be, again, part of running your aspects of your life. It could be aspects of running your business. There's agents that are providing more like professional services activity to analyze contracts, to analyze information. So it's anything that can be autonomous and goal-directed and tool-using is what you might think of as an agent, and that can be quite broad.
I'd love to get into the details of one of the things you mentioned is, which is the big thing is, hey, these agents are doing things, right? They are on a consumer level, they're going to go order your DoorDash for you or look up and message a friend. But on the enterprise level, they're going to be automatically coding, checking in code, reviewing what you're doing, managing your Jira tickets, and they're all going to be acting on behalf. So you also mentioned that at Google, you guys are really focused on what are the barriers, what are the judges that you're going to be implementing to ensure that these agents now are acting on behalf of someone. How do you even think about that? Like, can you wrap for the audience sort of, what does that look like? How do you think that security is going to play out?
So there's multiple levels to this. And again, we're at the early stage of a lot of this. There's a lot of work going on in the standards communities. We're doing a lot of work in the Coalition for Secure AI and as with the Cloud Security Alliance to think about what does that control stack for agents look like? And again, not just the base level of security things like authentication, authorization, delegated permissioning, but what does a control plane look like to control the behavior of an aggregation of agents that are orchestrated to deliver an outcome? We're at the very early days of what that looks like. But when you start going up the stack, so for example, we have MCP, the Model Context Protocol, a lot of work going on to improve and add security capabilities for how AI will use tools and to make sure that can be done in a safe way. And then there are things like Google Next a few weeks ago, we announced the agent-to-agent protocol in partnership with about 50 other companies. So this is all about how do you agent communications with other agents and doing that with authentication, permissioning, and authorization built in. So we're building with a lot of the other tech companies that stack of control to permit the safe, secure, and controlled use of agents. But we're very much at the early stage of all of this.
One of the things that has always been a situation that I've been worried about that I feel like I don't have or have seen answers to is it's not a permission problem on agents. A great example is I might have an EA agent, and my EA agent does have to have permission to my email and may have to have permission to my social media. But how do I prevent that agent from posting my email to my social media? And so there's almost like this intent problem where I know if I hire a true person, there is accountability for that individual where they will get fired, their family, and likely their salary will go away. It could impact their references. And so they have a long-term problem. So you know that there shouldn't be this kind of thing happening, right?
Well, and that's exactly the kind of thing that needs to be built into these agents as guardrails to enforce that kind of control in the way it's used. Plus, how do you not just delegate permission to an agent, but how do you delegate the permission in a way that the agent can obey your instructions about how it would further delegate those permissions to other agents it may use to achieve the outcome.
And somehow keep it from going off track in odd ways where this would occur in a scenario.
But again, that's so on the organizations that build agents to do these things comes a lot of responsibility to architect those business control principles in as part of the platform. Now, clearly over time, we'll see more standards, more approaches. We'll probably see more products that help organizations control and manage that. But again, we're at the early stage of figuring out how to build these agents. I think the other thing we have to be careful of is across an entire industry is think about what's the behavior in the future of trillions of agents in the environment. So you can imagine an agentic flash crash of some organization offers up a cheaper price and all of a sudden billions of agents are descending on it. This is something that we've had to deal with as part of regular e-commerce over the years.
Yeah, when a Nike shoe or tickets come on, they do that on the.
That's right.
Yeah,
That's right,
scalpers are automatically.
Well, the good news is, as part of all of this, is at some level, while it's all new technology and people are figuring out, it's the same good old business principles of how do we provide that control, exactly to your point. And again, you think about in the future is everybody will be a manager. You just might be a manager of agents rather than people, but everybody's going to have that responsibility to figure these things out.
Yeah. So even on continuing on the future of sort of agents and how we're thinking about that, one of the big areas is I've heard some comments about MCP obviously being the new enablement of agents with tools. And now maybe products in the future, they're no longer going to start offering user experiences. It's just going to be headless with their own MCPs that are now going to be integrated in a master chat or a dashboard that you can generate your own controls and dashboards without ever actually really the product itself just becomes the usefulness that provides the interface to that.
That's a really good point, because I think, again, in the future, businesses and all organizations, you have to think about the user and customer experience. Over the past few years, we've thought about API experiences for developers building on your platform, and now we have to think about tool experiences for AI's agents to be using those tools. And I think successful businesses in the future are going to think about all of that. It's programmatic interfaces, it's AI interfaces, and it's
another
interfaces.
Abstraction on top of that API. That is the new abstraction that you started.
And then not just that, but not just the agent to tool use through MCP, but the agent to agent work for having your agents be part of a bigger orchestrated framework of other agents using them to deliver an outcome. So it's going to be a tremendously interesting time over the next few years.
Where do you stand on the whole open source thing? Because you used MCP as an example. I've been having a lot of conversations about the balance. I won't answer the question, but I'm curious to know from your perspective, the open source world that has opened up here.
Yeah.
Now that technology that we have used has always been proprietary. It's always had an open source root somewhere.
Yeah.
With the AI space, and currently there's a set standard for how things should be.
No, it's interesting. There's a lot of work going on. So, for example, the reason we co-created the Coalition for Secure AI with a number of organizations, which is it's an open foundation under Oasis. And it's all about developing standards, frameworks, tooling to help manage the security of AI. We also have the Frontier Model Forum, which is an organization of all of the big AI labs to provide for controls and safety around the development of foundation models. And then there's ML Commons, which has been providing a lot of open toolkits for how you manage machine learning and generative AI and agentic AI.
Yeah.
And that is increasingly working on security standards. So the good news about all of this, including things like MCP is a published protocol, A2A, the agent-to-agent protocol is published and open. So the great thing about this space is there's a lot of stuff being done in open source that everybody can contribute to.
Yeah.
And in fact, the reason we set up the Coalition for Secure AI was exactly to encourage that kind of customer participation, not just tech company participation.
So when someone who's trying to build a security program, or maybe in most enterprises, uplift a security program today, we've spoken so far about the theme of things people are worried about.
Right.
For people who are uplifting a program today where they need to think about AI from a security from AI and AI for security lens, what's your, especially when we don't have a clear future for where this is going. It could be autonomous, could not be autonomous, it could be doing human approval. What should they consider putting in their security program? And it could be going back to the basics as well. What do you recommend to people who are CISOs or watching this or listening to this? That, hey, if 2025 you're working away from RSA, what should you be thinking about in your security program for the next, maybe, let's just say 6 months, because AGI maybe not on the
course. I think, so for security teams that want to improve their risk management of the adoption of AI in their organization, I think the CISOs and their teams are going to have to keep taking a bigger leadership position. So again, I mentioned before, I'm seeing a lot of CISOs becoming more like chief digital risk officers.
Yeah.
So when they're approaching AI just as security and not thinking about the broader safety, trust, reliability, quality, compliance, and privacy arrangement, the CISOs are having to take on those things for their organizations. There's a few exceptions, like large banks typically have risk and compliance teams and they spread that responsibility. But I think a lot of security teams are realizing they're going to have to move beyond just security, to think about the broader control requirements for AI. Then on the adoption of AI by the security teams, I think the main message we have for people is just get going on some prototypes, because you learn, as with any other technology change, you learn what you really need by experimenting and doing.
Yeah.
I think a lot of organizations are finding the low-hanging fruit of security operations automation.
Yeah.
There's a lot of low-hanging fruit around using AI to generate secure configurations and generate the configuration as code environment to set up secure environments. There's a lot of good stuff happening there.
Yeah.
And we're seeing the early stages of software vulnerability, software discovery as part of the development lifecycle. But I think the main thing is teams just need to get going and experiment, because you're not really going to know where the value is until you prototype and experiment.
Something I came up with as I've been talking to a lot more people is, I don't know if a bias comes into when people who have a lot of experience in cybersecurity start learning AI. I was talking to someone about this. Is it a smartphone moment? Like when my parents first, I gave them a smartphone. For me personally, it was very intuitive. I'm like, oh yeah, this works. But then my parents, the first time they saw a smartphone, why can't I press the button? What is, I can't. And I always bring that lens to the AI pace to go, when I try and learn as a security person who has years of experience in cybersecurity, I'm looking at AI and trying to understand prompting, like I'm asking the right question. When is it good enough to, like, hey, stick with one AI model, or keep experimenting with all the AI models? Because I only have an Apple or a Google. But in the AI case,
we're in the tech AI config. Oh, use this model for that, and this model. You have to make
right.
this prompt this way,
So
that prompt this way.
There's a few ways of looking at this. So again, when you're building applications, we're finding, if you go back 12, 18 months, you would find companies build an application and they would use one model. They're now building to be using multiple models.
Right, yeah.
And so it may be they'll build an application and it will use an open model with a low per token cost that is not a particularly sophisticated model, but it's good enough for most cases, and their application knows when to refer certain things to a much more high-end sophisticated model.
The
that
CEO
might have
model is what I would say. Yeah.
So typically a lot of applications now are using multiple models, and they determine which model to use for a particular task. So it's getting more sophisticated in terms of application construction. Now, in terms of your broader question, I think the other way of looking at this is it's not so much about the model you use, it's about the product and application that you use that surrounds that model. So I'll give you an example. So we've seen massive take up of the Google tool Notebook LM.
Yeah.
So notebooklm.google.com.
Makes the podcast,
It eliminates this.
So we wouldn't know the future. Yeah. We should upload this podcast to see if the virtual podcast host
It'll make it better.
That's an example where you see people that are even not really contemplating the fact that they're using a particular AI model, are using Notebook LM as a tool to upload large amounts of information to then ask it questions and get some analysis. And similarly, you just look across an array of products, and the model itself is blending into the background underneath an actual product that makes it usable for anybody, not just people that are the early adopters.
For your point, it's no one really cares about what language the code is written in.
That's right, yeah.
It's about the usefulness. What's the value you produce?
What do you want to use it for?
Yeah, we in the AI, since we're all geeky about the models behind the scenes, but really at the end of the day, it doesn't matter.
That's right.
What can you produce?
Yeah, and it's the same with software development. You bring up coding, that's where you see developers adopting AI aggressively, not because they're necessarily always using it to generate all their code, but they're able to use it to generate the scaffolding of an application, the data access libraries, the test coverage, that leaves them the focus on the high-end developer activity of building the business logic and the architecture. And everybody finds a unique way of using these tools. But again, that's the exact example of the model itself blends into the background under a great tool.
So this is a great bridge into vibe coding. All right, so Phil, so like one of the many things that I've talked to people around vibe coding is that obviously vibe coding in its current state is pretty interesting and is phenomenal at writing these little one-time applications. But when I actually talk to others who are like, you're technical at your core, I'm also technical. There are CTOs, VPs of engineering, CISOs, whatever, are now vibe coding, and they're so ecstatic because it makes them feel back, like they feel like they get this, I can code again, when that was like, that was way out of my league at the time, and I can go reconnect and do and build cool things. What's your feeling?
So I'm back doing some coding again, not because necessarily like it's helping, it's not about the generation of the software. It's the fact that many modern application environments require so much setup And the time to hello world is quite long for many modern application frameworks. But the great thing about, again, what I use AI for is just like, generate me an environment in which I can build, actually write the software. And it's reducing the time to hello world significantly. Again, what we're finding with developers in many organizations that we work with, again, they're using it for the same thing. They're not necessarily using it to generate entire software stacks, but they're using it to set up an environment. They're using it for configuration. They're using it for the basic.
You got a spot code.
The building blocks of generating their IDL for the data access. And what we're seeing, a lot of organizations use it to develop tests and improve their test coverage, which is a great thing for security teams, because we always want developers to have more regression tests and test coverage. AI helps a lot with that. And so we think it helps people that are less skilled at coding build more code. But I think one of the things that's going probably underreported is just how much it's amplifying the productivity of actually professional software engineers in removing a lot of the toil associated with software engineering, so they can maximize their focus on building software.
So when you think about, this is a great sort of getting into the future of coding. Like today, the way you think about it is these guys are at like very junior engineering software levels when you look at vibe coding today. And to your point, for a senior engineer, it's great because I can like, okay, give you this file, give you this file. Okay, I have a very specific problem. Help me figure out the scaffolding. And it'll help me think, boom, boom. For the others, they're like auto-generating these codes, and it's actually doing quite good, even in that. Where do you think that is going? Do you think that's going to sort of peter out, or that's just going to continue to the point where we are now starting where junior software engineers are having trouble getting jobs? Is where this is going to start taking, where they're starting eating software engineering as a entire
I think things are just going to change. I think this ultimately, like with a lot of the use of AI, ultimately democratizes people's ability to do things, which will still create more appetite for more of that software to be delivered. So again, when we've talked about this for years with kind of no-code, low-code type environments, this is just an even further enhancement of that. So if you look across an organization, everybody can be a developer. Now, security teams and IT teams need to provide the platforms and frameworks for that to happen safely with the right testing. But it's great ultimately that everybody can experiment at all levels of organization on building software for the organization.
So a product manager can now be an engineering manager and build the product.
Well, exactly, it might be that. It might be exactly a product manager may be able to generate the prototype. And when that has been successfully determined that's something that they want to build, then all levels of developers from junior to senior can take that and then production harden that initial set of code to be fully production ready. And again, this is more about how do developers, both junior and senior, use the tools to deliver an outcome.
So let me paint a scenario for you. In a future world, we are now at a point where the actual coding itself has been abstracted to this AI machine. They create these black boxes. And the way you now code software is through requirements, engineering requirements, product requirements. What sort of risks do you see creating more security issues? And where do you see actually maybe solving or remediating older security issues?
Well, so I think it's going to keep being very important for security teams to have even more of their traditional approach for software vulnerability identification, for identifying structural security and design flaws in software. So that's never going to go away. But on the flip side, though, I think there's more opportunity where having the AI generated code be generated in a way that is pre-hardened, that is using standard security libraries, that is automating away the toil of building some of these things in. So I think there's more opportunity there. But again, organizations have to do this with a control mindset. And so, for example, there was some discussions recently about AI generating hallucinated names of packages. There's that
splatting and
slot squatting.
Slot squatting, that's right.
So the answer to that is not necessarily that the AI needs to improve and not hallucinate those things, although that would be nice. But the real is you put a guardrail around that environment to say, I'm going to cross-check my code to make sure it's only using registered packages. And that's a software quality check, just like you would do that. So I think at the same level, we should have high expectations of this tooling to deliver transformational benefit. But at the same level, we should also not expect it to be totally magical, and we should keep the controls built around it.
There's still going to be these engineering-focused sort of harnesses that you will always have to pay attention to that sort of contain and manage the AI in whatever it's creating.
That's right. If you think about an AI agent as almost human-like, you would put the same controls around that as you would put around humans. It's quality checks. It's perhaps even later training about fine-tuning what you want them to do in accordance with enterprise policies and standards.
Yeah.
It's a very similar analogy.
I was just going to say that I'm generally the pessimistic kind, but in this scenario, I am actually pretty optimistic because I actually feel that if we get to that world, code itself can then become more standardized. It can be consistent.
Yep.
And that's pretty amazing because then you can really define what is then consistency and standards for me as an organization.
That's right, yeah.
And have that be boilerplated on
that's
any.
right.
So then it's not just up to an engineer to be a good engineer or a bad engineer. It actually really just becomes a boilerplate thing. That's
I think it'll be a transition period though. I think what happened with most organizations where there were people who loved Java, people who loved Node.js, there were people who loved different kinds of software. I imagine there'll be people who would love different kind of coding assistant softwares. When people like in the security would have to take a step back and go, okay, we're defining a standard for what kind of coding assistant, how much of it can be used, where can it be used, and what environments can we deploy them in. But the gist of what you were saying, what's going through my head was a PM being able to write code. Every technical leader watching this normally they were like, oh, how long would this take? I'm like, I don't know, man, maybe 1 month at least. And they're like, oh, the product manager goes to his AI agent, types it up. Took me like 5 minutes. So
yeah, you can build any prototype in 5 minutes.
I know, but I'm
the
going
hard part
The
is
key step is to not immediately put the prototype in production.
Yeah, but that's another risk I'm seeing. But as more people try and become coders who have traditionally not been coders, there is that, I guess, for lack of a better word, that's an unknown risk at this point in time. Where do they become, because we will probably get the same level of AI access to them as well as anyone else because you don't want them to not be productive. And that means I can have a prototype ready that I can give to a senior developer or senior tech leader person going, hey, this is what I'm trying to build. How much of it just can be productionized? What is practical?
So this is where it's also going to be important for more and more things to be put into underlying technical platforms. So again, if you think about the difference between somebody generating some code that's production ready or not production ready, it's all of the qualities of reliability, load balancing, security, a whole array of things. Now, you can train the AI to do more of that, but also I think this is what we're calling, we've talked about moving from shift left, so shifting security and reliability earlier in the design lifecycle. We now have to think more about shift downward. So going from shift left to shift downward, where more of the controls are baked into the underlying technical platforms. So no matter what code you're building for business logic, it's inheriting security, reliability, resiliency, a whole array of controls from the technical platforms like the cloud platform it's running on. That's not necessarily an AI-derived thing. That's just shifting downward into
It's
the
like
platform.
building an Android app. I don't need to worry about the security of the platform and anything else. I just build my functionality. The OS manages all the rest of that for me.
Yeah,
so how does an enterprise do that?
No, that's right. So I think this whole notion of moving from not just shift left, but shift downward is going to be the
But would you
important
say then the frontier model would have to take more responsibility? Like, for example, what happened in the cloud world, it's kind of go with cloud world, where a lot of the responsibility is shared responsibility, which is the same case with frontier model as well. I may use a service, but at the end of the day, I'm still responsible for the data that I'm putting into it, that whether it's sensitive, not sensitive, whichever direction may be going. If I'm shifting down, do you see a future where probably all of that security is baked into the frontier models or the large LLM providers?
So the frontier models, in particular models that are fine-tuned on security data, exhibit naturally better properties of generating more secure code, more other types of usage. But again, building more controls into the underlying platforms so that the software written on those platforms inherit that control is not necessarily something that has to be done with AI. That's just a part of shifting down into the platform itself.
Or I guess where I was going with this was that if it becomes default, to your point, like they already would come with the defaults to security because they're learning on that data.
Oh yeah, so they may need to fine tune on how to make the right calls into the platform to use the secure
and which ones do I need to
right.
use for my software versus I can like I'm gonna hate calling out compliance standards, but not everything listed in the compliance standards is applicable for every company. You pick the ones that is relevant for you.
This is why fine tuning becomes important. So organizations that are adopting AI to generate larger portions of their software are using the base capabilities of the foundation models, but they're also fine tuning on their own code, their own standards, their own libraries, so that those those foundation models that are used for this have also got the capability of generating organizational specific nuanced code.
I was going to ask in security teams that you've been talking to at Google Next and otherwise, which vertical in security, whether it's AppSec or security operation or whatever, which ones do you see as the ones that, as we're talking about future, which ones are adopting AI more, or which ones do you see would be the first cab off the rank for either
The most impactful for using AI to improve
I
security.
mean,
That's right,
the
yeah.
big one at the moment is security operations.
Right,
And
okay.
I think that's largely because people can imagine how to do it. It's
a lot of data as well.
historically quite a toilsome activity that people can imagine and want to automate. And there's a lot of organizations in their security operations teams have moved from ops analyst roles into more having security engineers in the security detection and response team. So they're more equipped and able to adopt automation technologies based on AI. So it's the security operations environment. Then we see a lot, actually in a lot of the risk and compliance teams, automating a lot of the kind of compliance attestations and other type of analysis we're seeing a lot of. And then we're also starting to see early adoption in some of the software penetration testing, vulnerability discovery teams.
Yep.
But I think first off the rank was security operations, definitely. Yeah.
I was going to just talk a little bit more on the app side. One of the key things when we're talking about all these people generating applications is I look back at what cloud did to servers in IT, where this allowed you to now one button click and deploy an instance and a server. And then it created this whole cloud sprawl problem. And then now are we seeing that same evolution now from an applications perspective of coming in the future where AI can now almost one click generate custom unique applications. And we know this as even engineers, they're now going to say they love building things. So do we see less sort of commercial versions being dropped and buying outside software to solve things and enterprises using their engineers to build these one-off unique applications, then it'll create a sprawl inside.
No, so I think there is more of an ability now for more organizations than there used to be to build their own custom applications.
Yes, yeah.
So I think what we're seeing is early experimentation, but I still think it's going to be the same, that any organization, small, medium or large, is going to take a portfolio approach to this. So there'll be some places where they experiment and prototype and use their own code. There'll be a lot of places where they still acquire third-party software because that just makes sense for them. And I think it's going to be more of a hybrid. An organization of the future will be lots of different agents, lots of different components. And the IT team with the businesses and the security team are going to have to take almost like a portfolio management approach of, is all of that hanging together in the right way? Is it conforming to business policies, security policies? And is it being effective in mitigating the risks to that environment? And I think that's going to be a portfolio approach.
Do you think that we'll start creating app sprawl inside of these enterprises? And now you've got, instead where you used to have, let's say 50, 60, now you're thousands and thousands with agents now all communicating these apps?
Potentially. Again, to your analogy about kind of servers, it's many organizations that have aggressively adopted cloud, they don't really think or count servers anymore. Just think about a flexible workload deployment to achieve a business goal. And it could be the future of software, especially in and around agents, is nobody really cares whether you have 100 applications or 10,000 applications. The question is, are you managing that portfolio of activity in a risk-managed way to deliver against a set of objectives? And it may be the old ways of counting things don't matter anymore. What matters is the end-to-end risk mitigation. And
Well,
there'll
that's
be
fascinating
different ways
to
of
think
doing
about.
it.
Yeah. Think about like dynamically generating custom applications based off of custom use cases and destroying or creating them on the fly would be one insanely amazing to think about, but like scary all at the same time. And we have nothing to think about.
Well, so the good news for security teams in all organizations is the security team is even more needed to help their businesses migrate safely to this new world. And I think it's a tremendous opportunity for the CISOs and their security teams to, again, to exhibit that business risk leadership, not just the classic kind of IT security leadership. So a lot of CISOs and teams have wanted to be more risk focused. And this is a tremendous opportunity to do that and add a lot of value to their businesses.
A high note, but any final thoughts for CISOs or cybersecurity leaders watching this? Final thoughts for anyone who's going to look?
In the context of AI, just what I said, which is engage with your businesses, think broadly about risk, not just the security risk. It's an opportunity to add a lot of value. And then also think about how you, the security team, are going to be an early adopter so you can improve your own productivity and capability, but at the same time learn the technology so you can be more useful to your businesses. I'm going to keep writing more about this stuff at philvenables.com, my blogs. There'll be more stuff that I put out on this topic in the future.
I look forward to more conversations as well, but thank you so much for coming on the show as well.
That's great.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Phil?
Thanks, everyone. See you next time.
Thank you so much for listening and watching this episode of AI Cybersecurity Podcast. If you want to hear more episodes like these or watch them, you can definitely find them on our YouTube for AI Cybersecurity Podcast or also on our website, www.aicybersecuritypodcast.com. And if you are interested in cloud, which is also a sister podcast called Cloud Security Podcast, where on a weekly basis, we talk to cloud security practitioners, leaders who are trying to solve different kinds of cloud security challenges at scale across the 3 most popular cloud provider. You can find more information about Cloud Security Podcast on www.cloudsecuritypodcast.tv. Thank you so again for supporting us. We'll see you next time. Peace.